Howdy folks, welcome back to my YouTube channel. I'm your host, The Mighty Bjorn, and today for you I have a WWE 2k19 video. And this video is going to be geared towards wrestling booking. And basically it's going to be a how-to guide on wrestling booking, how to set up your shows, things of that nature. I'm going to give some examples, advice, tips, things of that nature. And it's all based around what I know of wrestling. I did spend a few years in the wrestling business myself. Realistically, I've talked to a few bookers over the years, things of that nature, and just kind of learned how the booking process goes, what's the mentality, things of that nature. I'm going to dive into it here. I'm going to talk about first setting up your shows. Now, when you're setting up your shows for the WWE Universe, for those that are not familiar, the Universe mode is basically you're working as a booker, you're working as a wrestling promoter. You can set up your own wrestling promotion. There's even tools there where you could use various WWE shows to make your wrestling promotion, such as my experimental promotion, pretty much kind of learning the ropes of how it works, is I set up two shows. I do Monday Night Raw, and then I do SmackDown on Thursday nights. I know SmackDown's now on Fridays, but I set mine up for Thursdays, and then once a month I'd have a pay-per-view. Third Sunday of every month I'd do one of the WWE pay-per-views. So now my more serious attempt and figuring out the roster and stuff like that, I decided to restart fresh, and this time I decided to be a booker for TNA Wrestling. I know TNA's not really around anymore, although it kind of is, as Impact Wrestling, but I kind of did essentially TNA what if Dixie Carter and Vince Russo didn't fuck the business over. But let's not dive too much into my hate for Dixie Carter and Vince Russo. That being said, so TNA, what if it was still around as strong as it was, if not stronger, during the height of TNA wrestling? So I set up my shows. I only decided to stick with the one-show format, but I made the shows a little longer. I went from doing a 4 to 5 match card when I did 2 shows a week to a 6-match card every week on Thursday nights for Impact Wrestling. And with that being said, I also set up titles for tips for titles. What I'd say is you should have your top title, whatever it is. For me, it is the TNA World Heavyweight Championship. And then you should have an intermediate title, basically a build-up title to go for the Heavyweight Championship, which for TNA Wrestling, I decided to use the United States Championship. And then I have an X division for my cruiserweight, lightweight wrestlers. Then I have a set of tag titles, and then I have a women's championship. Now, that's something you need to think about when setting up your rosters. Are you going to have a women's division? Plus, you should think about when you're booking your wrestlers and you're essentially contracting the wrestlers to your roster, what kind of divisions are you going to have? I even have a TNA Hardcore Championship. So, kind of hailing back to the WWF Attitude days, had to have a hardcore title as well. And that's one thing I thought about when I was setting up my rosters. What kind of stars do I have? Where am I going to put them? What kind of divisions are they going to wrestle in? What kind of titles is going to be good for them to go for? Such as, well, a good example is Rhino. While I like Rhino, I don't think he's actually a really good main headline spot for, say, the World Heavyweight title, maybe for a short period of time, but not for a long term. But he would definitely make a good wrestler for a United States Championship slot for a few months, maybe on and off, stuff of that nature. Same way with when you're setting up your tag teams. You need to set up your various tag teams. And when you're setting up your rosters, you need both babyface and heel wrestlers, because you should always book it so that way you have a babyface going up against a heel. And I probably just lost some people because they're probably not used to that term. People probably are not really used to hearing that term anymore. So, babyface, general terms, is the good guy. He does the good things. He's the wrestler you want to cheer for, and blah, blah, blah. And always want to see win, but he can't always win because then there's no point of having a heel. The heel's the bad guy. He's the guy that cheats. He's the guy that interrupts entrances to attack his opponents. He attacks his opponents after the matches. He cheats the win, etc., etc. He's the bad guy. And that's what you should always have. You should always have the good guy versus the bad guy because, well, if you have two good guys wrestling each other, who the hell do you cheer? You can't cheer them both. It doesn't make sense to cheer them both. And if you have two heels going at it, who do you boo? Doesn't make sense to boo them both. So think about that too when you're booking your matches. You want a baby face versus a heel. Now in situations such as a triple threat match or a fatal four-way, you could get away with having additional heels and additional baby faces in your matches, but you really want it to always match up as that somehow you have a baby face versus a heel. Now there is certain stipulations. I would say there's exceptions, not rules, but I'll dive into that here in a little bit when I talk about putting on shows. Rivalries, once again, should always be a baby face versus a heel, especially for a rivalry. Rivalries are something that goes on for extended periods of time, and there's various different ways of having your rivalries, but your rivalries should always be two opponents that are equal to each other, fairly close. I would say maybe a 5-6 point spread at most, and sometimes I would say more often than not, it's better to have a higher rated baby face or higher rated heel than a higher rated baby face because it's easier for the heel to get more heat that way. Now, when putting on your shows, you have various match cards. For me, for TNA, I have a 6-match card, and then for my pay-per-views, I have 7. So I know what I have to work with. Plus, I have promo slots. So there's ways to work in different stuff. And when it comes to putting on a show, once again, I want to focus on the baby face versus the heel. I also don't always want my matches to be Extreme Rules type matches. Basically, cage matches, hardcore matches, I Quit matches, stuff like that. You want to work those in, but you don't want it to be a mainstay because stuff like that gets stale after so long. Yeah, it looks great having a ladder match, but if you have 5 ladder matches in a row, it actually gets pretty boring. It gets pretty dull pretty quick. So you want those to be your high point matches. You want to save those for pay-per-views or even do one as a main event for your for maybe your show, your regular weekly show. That being said, in the case of me, I have a hardcore championship. Those are always hardcore matches that's used for that, and that's just the standard on how I do that. That being said, I don't have the hardcore champion wrestle every week either. I'll skip a few weeks here and there because once again, stuff like that becomes stale if you're doing it all the time. So there's other things you can put on for putting on shows. You got your rivalries. Let's talk about the matches though. So there's a couple different types of matches where you have essentially your squash match, your arc match, you have a grudge match or a blow off match, and then you have your championship matches. I'm going to dive into how to use all these different types of matches to your advantage, and let's dig in first with the squash match, which is essentially it's a one-off match. You have one opponent that's usually standing way over another opponent. You got like a low-rated opponent versus a high-rated opponent. You're playing as the high-rated opponent, and it's just a one-off match to get them on the camera. That's essentially it. It's kind of to work the rankings, work the different divisions, things of that nature. Now, a squash match could lead into an arc series. What that is essentially what you could do is you could do various one-off matches just to make, maybe you got a heel you just contracted. Good example is when I contracted Scott Steiner, I brought him in for a couple of quick matches week after week. I would do a couple of quick matches just to get him on the camera, get him noticed, And then I started a rivalry between Scott Steiner and Matt Morgan, and which led into an arc series. That's your arc matches. That started off with just a regular singles match. That was a mid-card match, somewhere between around the third and fourth match is where I put that match. It was just a singles match, nothing fancy, but it started a rivalry, which then I started doing the various promo stuff where I'd have Scott Steiner talk about how great he is and how shit Matt Morgan is. And I'd have Matt Morgan pretty much coming out, cutting promos, saying about how great he was and how shit Scott Steiner is and how he's going to beat Scott Steiner, yada, yada, yada. And then what I'd do is I'd work that out over time. I'd have them coming out, cutting promos on each other. One bragging about how great he was while the other one's bragging about how great he is. I'd have them also working on other various mid-card matches, such as I had Matt Morgan, which is a babyface, face off against Bam Bam Bigelow at some point. I'd have him facing off against Vader. You know, I'd have him facing off against various heels of pretty much equal ranking, equal standing, while I would have Scott Steiner also facing off against various baby faces of the same ranking, same standing in the mid-card tier. Now, I wouldn't have them wrestle every week. Some weeks I would have them take off, but what I would do is always made sure that both of them somehow got in a promo. May it be I did a call-out promo where both of them would get used in the same promo, or I would do a promo for each of them where it would just be a self-promotion type deal. Now, I would let that go on. I'd build that up for about a month or so of them constantly cutting promos on each other. And then what I would do is I would do a backroom brawl with Scott Steiner versus Matt Morgan, non-official type deal. It's just in the backstage area. And basically what I'd do is I'd set it up where Scott Steiner ambushes Matt Morgan. Scott Steiner ends up winning. And then later I'd have the commissioner get involved. He'd come out, cut a promo, which there I used Jim Cornette as my essentially my commissioner. And basically he would announce a grudge match or a blow-off match, steel cage match at the pay-per-view that was coming up. And then that's where I would actually finish that rivalry off. Those guys would actually only wrestle each other 3 times. During that whole span, it was about 2 months said and done. And they would only actually wrestle each other 3 times in that 2-month period. But what that would do is that would build up Matt Morgan to move on for the Intercontinental, the United States Championship. While Scott Steiner, I'd have him do a couple more matches and actually move him on to the heavyweight because Slammiversary was coming up. And honestly, when it came to the standings, he was one of my more popular heels. So he ended up in the King of the Mountain match for the heavyweight title, which, well, it didn't really go well for Scott Steiner, but we'll let that go. But then that's how you do that. You have your point A. It might start off as a squash match. And then you have your point B, where it's various promos, various smaller matches. And then you have C, which is your blow-off match. And your blow-off match should be at either a pay-per-view or a main event during one of your TV tapings, one of your weekly shows. For me, as I said, it would be Impact. But then it should be some type of match, too, that's got some type of stipulation to it, some kind of goal. May it be, well, it's going to be a steel cage match. The winner has to escape the steel cage, or an I Quit match, or a 2 out of 3 falls match, or a hardcore match. I did one, actually, where it was a... it was a steel cage, but there was a stipulation headcanon wise that it was loser leaves town. So basically the loser has to quit the promotion, which that was another rivalry I had between Matt Morgan and Vader, where Vader lost the blow-off match, and basically I took Vader off the roster. Now that was a plan that I wanted to take Vader off the roster, and I wanted to fill put someone else in that slot in the roster, which I believe I contracted Randy Orton for that slot. And that worked out pretty good because basically I got rid of a big name heel for an even bigger name heel. So you can work out things like that. I mean, this is all headcanon stuff. It's all creativity stuff. So stuff to think about when you're putting on your matches, that not every match should just be some thrown off, one-off match. Sometimes there's always got to be a plot, even with the squash matches. Now, sometimes you'll do a squash match that is just a one-off. It's not there to be anything but to fill the card. But for the most part, you should always plot your matches as what is the reason behind this match. Why should I have this match? Why should the fans want to watch this match, etc. Now, another way to go about it, too, is also a championship match, which you could start off with a squash match, going into an arc series, if you will, where there might be one of the arc matches might be a match for the number one contendership. May it be against actually someone that's in the number one contender slot, or even against a non-title match against the champion himself, which would usually fit you in as a number one contender. And basically, instead of having a grudge match at the end, you would have a championship match. So that's kind of how that works out. Now, putting on your pay-per-views, that's when you should really be pulling out the stops. You should have your regular matches, but you should also have a little bit more in the way of your hardcore matches, maybe a ladder match, steel cage match. One of the pay-per-views I'm putting together, I have actually a hardcore match on the card for the United States Championship. I have a steel cage match for the TNA Heavyweight Championship, and I have a tornado tag match, hardcore match it's a ladder match, TNA Tag Champions as a hardcore match. And then the women's title I have up for lines in that pay-per-view, but it's just a standard straight singles match between two women. So that's really the differences there in a pay-per-view. Pay-per-views is where you should really pull out your higher end matches. And once again, that's the pay-per-views is also kind of where you want to put more championships on the line. Like your weekly shows, you should only put on like maybe one. Well, you should always put on one, in my opinion, but maybe put on two. You shouldn't do much more than two, unless like you're doing like a 7 match card or an 8 match card, and then maybe you could tuck a third one in there from time to time. But essentially, you should probably keep it at 2 at most if you're going to go with 6 or lower when setting up your shows. And then that's really it. I could sit here talk about the different types of matches and how you should use them and how you can use them. But essentially, when it comes to stuff like your Extreme Rules Wrestling, your steel cage matches, your ladder matches, your table matches, your TLC matches, I have hardcore matches. I have first blood matches where the first opponent to bleed loses. Stuff like that. That should be stuff you do for your pay-per-views. Even a 2 out of 3 falls match you could do during a normal TV taping, but you should actually do it more or less for a pay-per-view, especially because they're going to be longer matches. They're probably going to be 20 minutes if you got 2 good opponents, and it could be even longer still. You could also do an Iron Man match. You could set time limits for your matches. And you should think about that different kind of stuff when you're using the different types of promos and things of that nature. You want to take and think about what is your opponent's really saying, because, of course, whatever they're putting in for scripting is kind of a waste and not really what I would think they would be saying, to be honest. I think it's just kind of words they came up with. So I just kind of imagine to myself how there's 2 guys in the ring, they're cutting promos on each other, and like right here, you got Matt Morgan. Matt Morgan's talking about how he's going to whip the hell out of Ahmed Johnson, walk the dog all over him, and then he's going to pin him for the United States Championship. And you got Ahmed Johnson telling Matt Morgan that he's not even good enough to lick the sweat off his boots. So that's the kind of stuff you have, the kind of promos you got going. That's what's, the entertainment is. This whole joke wrestling stuff that you see nowadays is, well, I just don't want to dive into it. And essentially, when it comes to putting on your shows and your matches too, you should be thinking about the ratings of your matches. They give you a nice little star system here to work with. And essentially, when you're putting on your shows and even your pay-per-views, you should start off really strong. But you shouldn't be trying to go for like a 5-star match as your first star match of the night, because it's really hard for the main event to top a 5-star rating. So maybe a 3.5, 4-star rating for like your opener. That way it gets the fans amped up, gets the fans excited about the show. Cut in some promos, cut in some more matches. Go for like 3.5-star matches throughout your show as well as your pay-per-view. Now, pay-per-view, you probably shouldn't go lower than a 3-star match or 3.5-star match. Your pay-per-view should be mostly 4-star matches, with your main event reaching like 4.5, 5 stars. And then that's the same way with your weekly shows as well. As the last match, the main event should be a 4-star, 5-star main event, with your semi-main even, which is the match before your main, probably being a 3.5, 4-star semi-main. And then, like I said, 4 to 5-star for your main event, even on your weekly shows, as well as your pay-per-views. But one thing to focus on is not all your matches should be 5-star matches. It's unrealistic to imagine wrestling be nothing but 5-star matches. I know that's what everybody seems to want nowadays. And, well, it's starting to make all the matches look the same, folks. It's actually definitely made wrestling pretty boring over the years. So my advice when you're booking your events for your WWE 2k19 game or whatever WWE 2k19 or 2K game you have that you're doing a universe mode, think about how you're doing your matches. If all your matches are 5-star matches, then that makes none of your matches special. Think about it that way, folks. Anyway, that's really going to be it for when it comes to talking about wrestling booking. But if you have any questions that may be something I skipped over, or maybe something you'd like some more details on, please don't be afraid to ask. I would be more than willing to explain. I do pay attention to my notifications on YouTube. But anyway, folks, hopefully this video helps you out, gives you kind of a perspective of how you should be booking wrestling. Hopefully you all enjoyed the video. Thank you very much for tuning in, and have yourself a wonderful day.